Humblemud.
What if I told you that there is an amazing game on the Super Nintendo that combines things you would never expect, like The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Gauntlet, and Die Hard. Yes, the movie Die Hard.
Welcome to the party, pal!
And even though the game is a very polished and tight combat-focused experience, it often gets missed even on hidden gems lists today. While it's no Terranigma, Evo, or ActRaiser, I believe that the Firemen is a game that continuously goes criminally overlooked. In this video, I'm going to make the case for why I think it is in fact the most criminally overlooked game on Nintendo's 16-bit home console. First, let me tell you what it has going for it. At its heart, the Firemen is a top-down shooter with action-adventure elements and environmental puzzles. However, instead of gunning down monsters, you're fighting fire. Now, the flames here aren't just a stagnant wall of flames that you need to power on some sprinklers or something to spray it down so that you can then get to the next area or something typical like that. No, this is an action-packed experience where the flames are unwieldy and unpredictable, just like they can be in real life. This is a game where you'll need to attack the source to prevent the fire from spreading further, where you'll need to last-minute dodge explosions as windows crash around you, and where robots engulfed in fire threaten your safety. The Firemen is an intense game where you'll be locked in a room with nothing but your trusty hose and some extinguisher bombs to defend yourself against a giant wildfire that whips around the room like it's almost sentient. And then you'll do it again and again, running headfirst into the face of danger each time. The Firemen is a game that, even on its normal difficulty, will test your reflexes, your run and gun experience, and your situational awareness. And one of the best parts about this game, especially for the modern busy gamers nowadays, is that even if you have to retry it a couple times, which you probably will, the whole game can be beaten within 2 to 3 hours. It's a tight, fat-free experience, and of course the more that you play and get a sense for the environment, the better you get. In fact, by the time I had finally gotten a good handle on the game's progression and levels and hazards, I ended up beating it in just an hour. When you're playing this game, its intensity makes you forget that you're not actually fighting monsters like you would in pretty much any other video game, because the enemy AI, from the robots engulfed in flames to just the flames themselves, are intimidating and aggressive. There are a lot of really good things going on for this game here, so you might be asking yourself, why have I never heard of it before? Well, there are quite a few things that lead to this. First off, the Firemen was never released anywhere other than the Japan and PAL regions. That means that North American players were out of luck, which is interesting because the game itself seems to take place in a North American setting. Additionally, the game was developed by Human Entertainment, who, while they have made some games with a lasting legacy like Fire Pro Wrestling, were still a relatively small studio that unfortunately didn't last terribly long afterwards. Despite that, this game has a level of polish that makes it feel like it could have been made by a bigger studio like Capcom back then, and in my opinion, if you enjoy the run and guns of the era like Mega Man X, I think this is a solid choice to add to your library. The Firemen takes place in the near future of 2010, and thankfully, this is not one of those games where it wildly predicts that we will be in a neon-soaked cyberpunk future. It actually feels realistic to what we had at the time when it comes to technology and architecture. Basically, a giant 6-story building is on fire, and your team is the first dispatched to the area. The group splits up, and you control the captain, Pete, and along with your assistant, Danny, are charged with the task of getting through this building, evacuating all of the civilians trapped in there, and hopefully putting a stop to this thing before the chemicals made within this facility are exposed to the heat and flames, which could prove catastrophic. Now, while this game does not feature 2-player, unfortunately, another big boon when it comes to playing the Firemen is that your AI-controlled partner, Danny, is an amazing assistant. Danny is invincible, he swings his fire axe around like it's no one's business, and he does a great job playing defense for you and assisting you in actually fighting the fires. This guy almost seems like he must have been a fire mage in his previous life or something, the way that he's effortlessly beating them down and asserting his dominance over them. Another great thing related to Danny is that there's no real backtracking here, because if you do find a civilian and save them, Danny will simply throw them onto his shoulder and run them out of the building safely, and he's back in no time, seriously. Honestly, Danny is the low-key MVP of the whole story, the Samwise Gamgee of the Firemen. And in my opinion, it's just super impressive to think that this 1994 game has such a strong AI partner in it. Even today, there are games that have horrible partner artificial intelligence, but the Firemen, it's not one of them. Now, I'm sure you've noticed by now that the game has some pretty gorgeous pixel art too. One of the things it does especially well is communicating hazards to the player. The flames are animated in a way that makes them feel alive and unpredictable, and the effects throughout the game are impressive and will absolutely make you jump, especially when there are unexpected explosions. One detail that I really love and that you can see early on is that your hose can actually shatter glass. It's a small touch, but it adds a lot to the immersion of fighting a fire inside of a building like this. Even better, that mechanic will become an important part of the gameplay itself. And while we're on that topic, let's cover some more specific gameplay moments that will keep you wanting to come back to this game. In the Firemen, you have 4 main moves. First is your water hose, which gives you lots of range, but because you're not hitting the base of the flames when you do this, it takes a lot longer to extinguish them. That's why you also have a downward spray that fires right in front of your feet. This does hit the base of the flames and thus does more damage to them. And if you're familiar with traditional shooters, you can almost think of this downward spray sort of like using a shotgun compared to a longer range weapon. Less range, but greater spread and damage. Also, major pro tip for you, if you tap the downward spray repeatedly, you can quickly clear out the flames in comparison to when you just hold it down, and that will really save you some much needed time. Holding down the button isn't useless though. While it does cause you to move really slow, it also creates a really strong defensive barrier when fire is rushing towards you, which is great for crowd control. You can also crawl, which is especially useful for maneuvering around hazards and ducking under the waves of flames that will occasionally sweep through a room. Lastly, you have extinguisher bombs that you can throw, which deal massive damage and clear out flames instantly. These are extremely useful, but I highly recommend saving them for the bosses. As you can see, the flames in this game function like enemies would in other games. Over time, you'll be able to spot different types of flames, their weaknesses, and you'll learn how to prioritize them and how to take them out safely. Some flames will continuously spawn more fire around them, sort of like an enemy spawner in Gauntlet. Take those out as quick as you can to gain control of the room. Little flames like this can only be extinguished with the downward spray shotgun. And then you also have these traveling tumbleweed flames that burst out into 4 directions when you defeat them, so watch out. Earlier, I mentioned how cool it is that the hose can break glass. While it is really impressive, especially for a game from this era, later in the game you'll learn that it's not always the best move to just break glass willy-nilly like this, because if you accidentally break some glass in a room that has a lot of pressure built up, it can trigger an explosion which does massive damage, and you really only have about a second or so to duck and get out of the way. And on that note, there are tons of environmental hazards in this game. As I've mentioned, you've got to dodge overhead flame waves, but later in the game you'll come across collapsing floors, falling lights, and burning trees that fall and threaten to crush you at a moment's notice. Adding to the tension and action here is a time limit on each level. And something I love about this is that unlike other games of the time, where the timer is basically just an afterthought left over from arcade game design, the timer here actually works diegetically, because in a situation like this, you really would have a limited supply of oxygen and time to save all the civilians and contain the fire before it turns into a real catastrophe. Now, all of that is well and good, but I'm sure some of you Super Nintendo enthusiasts out there might want to argue that the Firemen is not technically the most overlooked game of all time, and I can totally respect that if you feel differently than I do. There are games that admittedly deserve more recognition, like Evo, ActRaiser, Soul Blazer, Terranigma, and Pocky and Rocky, to name a few, that have reached a sort of cult classic hidden gem status on the SNES. But the Firemen is often excluded from this prestigious list, and I think that's because of a very simple but very powerful reason. As a concept, the Firemen is just not extremely exciting on paper. Compare a game about firefighting to a game like Evo, which has a concept that's so interesting on its face that even non-gamers will say it sounds cool. In Evo, you start out as a lowly creature and eventually evolve over time throughout various time periods. Super interesting immediately. Games like Terranigma, Soul Blazer, or ActRaiser are much more easily communicated communicable about why they're interesting because they take place in a familiar medieval JRPG or action RPG setting that you're likely accustomed to if you're an SNES fan already. By comparison, the Firemen is just a very vanilla concept. Playing as a firefighter doesn't necessarily translate into an automatic, super exciting game idea for most people, even though these guys are the real heroes in everyday life. Plus, the idea of playing a heavy action-based game without some kind of major evil villain to fight or even monsters of some sort to defeat could possibly be a hard sell. Yet, its clever restructuring of otherwise everyday source material is really part of what makes this thing so unique. As I mentioned earlier, Human Entertainment went bankrupt in 2000. The game never made it to North America, and the even more obscure Firemen 2 for the PS1 never made it out of Japan, so perhaps it's no surprise that the game never saw a re-release on something like the Wii Virtual Console like so many other SNES games did, nor did it get a re-release in some form years later like ActRaiser or Pocky and Rocky. Curiously, another firefighter SNES game, Ignition Factor, did get a second life on the Wii VC though, plus there's Real Heroes Firefighter on the Wii too. Man, we were so close! Anyways, while the Firemen never really had a mainstream legacy, it did have quite the personal legacy with me. On my 18th birthday, so 14 years ago, I asked my parents for a Dingoo A320, and I was beyond excited to get one. If you're not aware, this was one of the first popular retro emulation handhelds, released way before Retroid or Anbernic or anything else like that was around. I allegedly found this massive SNES ROM set, randomly selected a game, and it ended up being the Firemen. While I never made it that far, admittedly, and really only played it for like one afternoon, that game has stuck in my brain still to this day 14 years later, and I think it really speaks to how special this game is that first impression was that strong. So I decided that since I'm doing this backlog challenge this year, 2026 was the year that I would beat the Firemen. And I have to say, after beating it, I'm so glad that I gave it another shot. It absolutely holds up all these years later. It's challenging, not afraid to admit I died quite a few times, and there were a lot of unexpected surprises in the way of the intense boss fights and the story that the game tells. It was really cool to find out that I yet again accidentally stumbled into another Christmas game, as I had also beaten Blue Stinger for the first time a couple months ago. And considering that the Firemen is an action-based game that takes place entirely within one building on Christmas Eve, this has got to be one of the best die-hard type gaming experiences you can possibly have. It's also worth noting that since the PAL version has an English translation and there's an NTSC patch out there that you can get that allows you to play the game at 60 FPS, North American players can finally play this game like they would have had it actually made it past its prototype state back then. I'm so glad I finally gave the Firemen a revisit and made it out of the Metrotech building alive all these years later to see the snow. I think this is one of the most fun and unique games on the SNES. It's still very playable today, the music is absolutely fantastic, and it's one of those that I'll definitely daydream about and reminisce on for years to come. Imagine if the franchise had been more popular and we could have seen like a Gears of War style third-person shooter sequel on a more modern console with maybe like Army of Two type co-op mechanics where your partner helps you out of those tight situations just like he does in the SNES version. What can I say? A man can dream. Anyways guys, I think that about does it. I'd love to know your thoughts on the Firemen. If you've played it before, if you feel like I'm totally wrong and another SNES game is way more overlooked than this one, any and all thoughts, I welcome them all. If you're still here, thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay humble.